Right, just talk in there and we'll see.
So I am talking. Is it better?
You can't hear it once it's into the thing. Talking to your mic?
That's what I'm saying. Can you?
Nothing's coming up in here.
Did you start again? So I'm restarting the live stream.
New live stream this time. Hopefully we won't have the same issues.
Can you hear anything off your phone?
I'm not on the live stream. Okay, that sounds good. Still crackling.
So yours not too bad though. Talk something again.
I'm just talking here. Banana Bread got in early with the comment. That's what this whole game is about, really, isn't it? Getting the questions in as early as possible.
I'd say your mic might just be FUCK.
I don't think so. It's perfect when we listen to it through Zoom.
There's obviously something going wrong there.
I think there's a problem with how that's accepting it. Because it's way too loud when it comes through. It says sound. They all said sounds way better.
Yeah, it's not great.
Just keep going. Banana Bread says, question regarding isometrics and tendon pain. I recall you lads saying isometric is best to improve tendon and ligament strength, maybe help some combat athlete or combat Achilles and elbow rupture. If so, how many times per week at what kilos? So isometrics are the starting point for all of your tendon, ligament, rehab stuff, and for your prehab stuff as well. What you're really looking for isometrics is you want the lowest barrier for entry possible. So a lot of time for like our hypertrophy and work and stuff like that, we're looking for maximum recoverable volume. So the most amount of work you can do and recover from. When you're looking at the tendons and ligaments, you're really looking at it from the other end of it. So you want the minimum dose response. So the smallest amount possible to get some sort of response from it. Now, it's difficult because with your tendons and ligaments, you're looking around the place and saying, oh, am I looking for heat in the tendon? Am I looking for pain in that tendon or ligament? Do I want to feel tightness, weakness, strength, whatever it is around there? And to be honest, it is a bit more sensitive. It is something you're going to have to play around with a bit more. What I generally say to people, and let's just take knee tendon or knee ligaments as an example. Let's say your patellar tendon or quadriceps tendon has some tendonitis starting off and you're looking to rehab it. What you start off with is the very, very smallest amount you can do, ensuring it's absolutely pain-free. And for most people, if they're having some sort of tendonitis or maybe the beginnings of some tendon aches and pains, I would start off with something like just a straight knee extensor hold, starting off with 4 or 5 sets of 10 to 15 seconds, unweighted, maybe adding 5% of body weight onto that. So a 5 kilo dumbbell hooked over your toes, holding your knee out in a fully extended position. If that isn't inducing any pain, that's great. Start from there, go from there, build it up in terms of the length of time you're holding them for. Kind of 4 to 6 sets tends to be pretty good for most people. Then once you've got it to the point where you're able to hold that for 60 seconds or so, then you can start slowly increasing the weight on those. Once you get to nice heavy weights on those, then you can start looking into more of the plyometric style things that will tax the tendon a bit more. But starting off with, you just start for the minimum amount of work that's going to get any sort of response that isn't pain or inflammation.
Oscar O'Hara said, hi lads, what are your best advice for not jumping forward in catch position for your heavier snatch list phases? I know I have more in me, but technique is holding me back. So in terms of jumping forward in the snatch, it's an issue with obviously the barbell being too far forward. Now it could be too far forward as it leaves the ground. It could be too far forward as you pass the knee. It could be too far forward as you make contact. And as you extend, it could be any one of those places. It could be a combination of these. It could be any three of them. So you need to adjust your technique here. So obviously without seeing a video of your technique, Oscar, we can't say which one it is. It could be your knees are not moving far enough backwards as you pass the knee and your shoulders too far behind the barbell. And then as a result, you're pulling the barbell back and you're pulling your shoulders back behind the barbell too much. Then you bump the barbell and you have to chase it forward into the catch position. So it's a technical issue and you need to address it by figuring out where that issue has come, because if it's your extension and you're smashing the barbell, you could spend all months doing pause snatches, trying to fix it at the knee, but it might be causing that issue. So you have to figure out where the issue is coming from, and it's only one of a few places, but you need to figure out which one it is.
Dion says run it. Una says thoughts on Team Italy's performance. Obviously, I'd say they are incredibly disappointed with how that went. I think most of their big athletes are pretty much sorted anyway in terms of Olympic qualification, so maybe they're not that disappointed.
Well, no.
Will Julia miss out, Mr. Rendino?
Imperial miss out.
Okay.
The more popular ones. I don't know if Mr. Rendino will be able to go. Nina will be going. And then there's another female lifter I think is going to go. Can't think of her name. Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on it, to be honest. Nino's definitely looking worse for wear.
Yeah, it raises some questions about that system that a lot of people are asking anyway. But yeah, I don't, as Griff said, have any strong opinions on it. Balrog, channels to watch primitive technology, well suited for fellow cavemen. I don't know what that channel is. I must take a look.
Shifting places, Olympic lifting, and commercial gym, is it possible? Moving from an Olympic gym to a commercial gym, is it AM? Yeah, if that's the question, then yeah, you can do that. It's the biggest issue with switching to a commercial gym, depending on where you are and how busy it is and the equipment, is that even if you've good equipment, very often it'll get damaged. It's hard to get the platforms. It's hard to get time if you're training. Most people train at the same time, and it's logistically, there's nothing to stop you doing it in terms of your performance, but getting access to that equipment is quite annoying. It's just, there's so many annoying things about training. Even in a weightlifting gym, it can be annoying because you have to share platforms and barbells and stuff sometimes. So I'll be honest, at this stage, I just like training at home. And obviously I like training other people in the right circumstances, but sharing bars and platforms is something I did for a very long time, obviously, but I just don't care for it anymore. So yeah, you can definitely do it, but it just depends. Like, you might get a 30 millimeter barbell with bushing bearing or bushings, and it's not going to spin very well. Or you might get 6 Eleiko barbells and platforms and Eleiko platform plates and the anti-vibration platforms, and nobody might use that section of the gym, and you might be really lucky. So it depends on where you are and what equipment they have, so it can be done. There's nothing stopping it. Weights, once you have a good barbell and a platform, you've pretty much ticked 80% of the boxes, and obviously you get access to a lot of great assistance equipment in gyms. You get your GHDs, your back raises, you get all your dumbbells, you get your racks, pull-ups, cable machines, you get all great assistance work available to you. So there is big benefits in that regard.
Taicho 103 says, what do you think of starting strength? We've a kind of general rule that we don't talk shit about other coaches, so take from that what you want. Moniel says, what are your thoughts on top sets and back offs versus straight sets versus ascending sets on a strength movement? So everything we do is straight sets at a working weight. There is no misinformation out there about the importance of volume in strength training and in power training. There is no disagreement out there in terms of the importance of volume in strength training and power training. You'll see some disagreements out there in the bodybuilding and hypertrophy world, but in terms of strength training, everything is very well known. The science of it is incredibly well known, and the most important thing is the volume you're doing at those important or deemed to be most important for the time right now working weights, and that's why everything is straight sets. Top sets with drop-offs tend to be people who can't delay that gratification enough, and they'll want to do a top set, and then they know they need to make up the volume, and they'll make up that volume in some other ways. Or else they're people who are making up for that deficit in other ways, usually with PEDs or something along those lines. So you'll see a lot of enhanced lifters doing a top set and then some drop-offs, because you can do it. The damage to your system is mitigated much easier than it would be for most people who are natural, if they're going up to do very top or very heavy top sets and then doing their drop-off sets afterwards. And in terms of the ascending sets is very much the same thing. As you're building up, say if you do 5 at 140, 5 at 150, 5 at 160, versus doing 3 sets of 4 at 160. You get more valuable volume done at more meaningful weights when you do straight sets. And that's why that's the system we use. To be honest, that's the system most people use, unless you're in either of those two cases I talked about at the start.
Stuart said, hey boys, if my hands are big enough to hook grip with more than one finger, should I get my middle finger over my thumb easily, but is more better? So in theory, more is better. It's more secure. What you need to look for is that the angle of your hook grip setup is pretty much in a straight line. So if you can get 3 fingers in with the hook grip, but you need to be in a position where you have a less than straight line at the wrist, then you're putting a lot of tension in your arm. You're going to mess up your technique. So you need your wrist in a pretty extended position, and we can ensure then that we're pulling and pushing at the leg. So if we go into this kind of position to get extra fingers, if we have a flexion in the arm or an angle at the wrist and the elbow to get those extra fingers in the hook grip, you're going to be putting a lot of extra pressure on your arm in the initial pull, and you won't be able to use your legs and back as well. So it's pretty important to look at that angle. So if you can get that and still have an extended arm and wrist, then you are in a good position, as it should be more secure. But if not, 2 fingers should be enough.
Wolf Mooney says, it sounds good now, lads. A bad idea, I know, but I started Smolov Junior for bench after a long 5 or 6 month hypertrophy phase. How should I go about peaking, maxing out after the 3 weeks are completed? I thought Smolov Junior was longer than 3 weeks. What I would say is definitely if you're after a long hypertrophy phase and you go into something as intense as Smolov or Smolov Junior or one of those training blocks, I wouldn't be maxing out after 3 weeks. I wouldn't be peaking after 3 weeks. If you're determined to stick with Smolov Junior, I'd probably run that 3 or 4 times, get kind of 9 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks under your belt, and then go for that peak and taper. I wouldn't be going anywhere near a taper right now if you're kind of 3 weeks in. I thought Smolov Junior was a bit longer than that.
I haven't looked at Smolov Junior in a long time, I would say, in terms of the bench.
I used to have an altered Smolov Junior called Fitzlov, which is basically just way smaller jumps in between. That used to work quite well, but it's very aggressive. Felix B says, Dylan Cooper once said, to enter a weightlifting meet, even if you can only lift 25 kilos, thoughts on competing if they're trash, do it.
Yeah, definitely.
Do it as early as you can, as often as you can. You just need to get good at competing. Weightlifting competition is a very, very strange and fickle competition. You'd have seen it if you watched that Weightlifting World Cup or the IWF World Cup. How many people really mess up at competition. So you need to compete as early as possible.
That's your next one.
John MD says, psychology question. Any advice on delaying gratification and trusting the process? Maybe in a combat sport context. Cheers. Yeah, so big problem with combat sports is a lot of people are massively addicted to the sport they're doing, whether it's jiu-jitsu, whether it's kickboxing, whether it's MMA, and they can't stay out of the gym, or they can't stay away from really high intensity sparring sessions or that competitive element of it. What I would say is you have to have a very good idea of why you're doing the training you're doing, not just showing up to training every day and going to war. You need to understand that there is a process there. Maybe that's a sit down with your coach or with one of the higher belts or somebody who's a bit more experienced, and talk with them through the steps you're going to go through. In the beginning, you're just figuring out what's happening. Then you might have a point where you're figuring out what's happening and you get to add some context to it in training. Then you might be able to see the kind of general structure for what's going on. But definitely understanding the system before you kind of delve fully into it. A lot of people just get really addicted to that kind of whole lifestyle of it and kind of living to go to training every day, and every day they're training, they're going to war. Having a 10,000 foot view really, really helps. And it's the bad thing about combat sports is it's not always clear what the system is, because you're showing up and your coach just tells you what you're doing today, what you're drilling today, what the structure of the session will be, but you might have no idea what the structure of the next 2 or 3 months is going to be. So having a better view of your longer or medium term plans can really help with that and could stop that kind of constant competition mode.
Nicholas, how do you guys do soft tissue work? Like, how long do you go for multiple sets, or what would you recommend? So it depends on the muscle group, it depends on what you're trying to do with the soft tissue work, and it depends on what kind of modality you're doing. So soft tissue work, I think it's best to make use of all of them until you find something that works. In particular, generally you're looking to accumulate a couple of seconds, or you're looking for a relief on that particular issue. So if it's a non-injury related soft tissue work you're doing, you're looking to reduce some of the adhesion points in regards to what you're looking at. The debate rages on in the community in regards to whether it's entirely neuromuscular or the presence of these adhesion points are the main issue, and you're deleting them, for want of a better word, or eliminating them. The adhesion points are very well proven, and they're both in cadavers, and they use ultrasounds in other ways to show them. And the question kind of rages is that you can get instant relief sometimes. So, like, is it actually possible that you're removing the adhesions when you're doing the soft tissue work? So it is quite interesting among the relevant experts. What you do depends on what you have. You know, you've soft tissue, you've someone else to do it for you, physical therapist, you have a foam roller, soft tissue balls, massage gun, voodoo bands, a combination of those. So some of it will go by feel. There is a minimal threshold of usually what you need to do. You know, if you use a massage gun for 15 seconds, it's probably not going to do much. But if you spend a session of 10 minutes with a massage gun, it might do the same job. Maybe you might need to use a foam roller. So it depends. Biggest thing is most people probably don't spend enough time when they're doing soft tissue work, and they definitely don't do it frequently enough. So a lot of times, you know, people will leave it before training. They'll do it only when they're engaging that particular muscle group before training. So let's say your front rack is really tight and you know it's your lats involved in it. Most people will, if they even get this far, will use a foam roller for 1 minute either side for the front rack, 2 minutes accumulated, and then they'll spend an hour clean and jerking and then a half an hour front squatting, and they'll have done that for years. And they're like, wow, it's not really improving. But you're sending the signal for multiple hours a day. Maybe you're sitting at your desk with a lot of internal rotation, you're doing your clean and jerks, and it's putting a lot of pressure on them. You know, 2 minutes total twice a week isn't going to make a meaningful change to that tissue. So it depends on what you're looking at. It depends on how long it's been an issue. It depends on what's causing the issue. But higher frequency is generally better for most people. Most people probably need to spend a bit more time. It doesn't necessarily need to be 7 days a week, but in some cases we've seen, and both personally with athletes, sometimes it needs to be every day. Sometimes it needs to be every day with mobility every day. So there's a lot of different aspects in regard to what kind of soft tissue work you need to do and how long you need to accumulate. I would say err on the side of caution of going a little bit longer than a little bit too short. So if you don't cross that threshold with that soft tissue work, you're not going to get a meaningful benefit. So one of the ways you could test that is, let's say you're doing hip flexors or hip extensors and you are doing some soft tissue work. You do the couch stretch, you feel how tight it is, or it's your glutes or something, you look at external rotation and you look at how tight it is. Then you spend a certain period of time, a defined period of time doing soft tissue work. Then you retest again. It's a rudimentary way of doing it for you personally. And then you can look at that time frame. And if you saw a meaningful change, then you can use that as the minimum threshold for time frame. And you could go about it a little bit more clinically in that fashion. But it probably needs to more often. Modality depends on what one seems to respond. So sometimes voodoo flossing might be better. It might be a massage gun. It might be a combination of those. You could soft tissue work with a voodoo floss, for example, if it was your quad or something like that. So a little bit longer than you think you need to, and probably more frequently than you think you need to, and then look for results and see what changes. And do you see an improvement after? Sometimes it can take a couple of days if it's a bigger session, if it's something that hasn't been improving for a while, if it's been an issue for a long time. Like my elbow is something that I've been working very hard on. So I might have seen in one of the training vlogs. I went to see my neuromuscular therapist, and I've think around like 7 sessions now. And in one session, we got my elbow fully straight, which was great progress for me because it let me know that there wasn't a bony growth in my elbow and I didn't have to get surgery on it. Last night, for about 4 seconds, my elbow was beyond full extension and I could extend it fully under my own volition. After 40 minutes of just spending time on bicep, brachioradialis, delts, and pecs, and I could extend it beyond full extension back to where it used to be for like 4 or 5 seconds, which was great progress. and then immediately went back to that fixed position, which is an issue in of itself. But that was after a really long period of time. Now, this has been an issue that's ongoing, and that was after, I think that was like the 7th physical therapy session. So the biggest thing I think with soft tissue work is people just don't give it enough time, enough frequency. You need to treat it like mobility needs to be treated like strength training or conditioning or sport specific practice. If you want to improve it, you've got to commit a little bit more to it. And I think that's one of the reasons some people don't use it that well, is that they're, you just don't give it the time. You're like, you do a little bit of ankle stretching and you're like, oh, my ankles never improve. And you're like, at 4 minutes total across the week isn't going to hit the nail on the head.
I think some people treat it like you wouldn't treat doing some lunges as a warm-up at the start of a session for 3 sets as like strength training for lunges. Yet that's what they do with their mobility. Dion says, hey lads, I'm trying to get to a 100 kilo clean as soon as possible. I can front squat 110 for 4+ reps, but I can only clean 93. I know it's hard to tell without a video, but what could be the prognosis? It's your technique. You just need better clean technique. The number one thing I could say is if you're on one of the programs or you're on the app, get into the members group and you could submit your videos every week, and myself and Owen will give you video feedback. But we can't tell you what's wrong with your technique.
Elliot's Max. Yeah, Elliot, very excited to see, because you've been sharing lots of stories, which we're very grateful for. So it would be, I'm very excited to see tonight. So do share, let us know.
Dr. Demographics IE says, I just got the Sika app. I'm wondering what program to use for hypertrophy. I'm doing a body recomp this off season. Should I run off-season athlete? Yeah, so the off-season strength and hypertrophy program is the program for you. Definitely. You say you'll be in a calorie deficit, looking to shift 20 kilos. So what I'd be doing that with is I'd probably do that with the track running one. So off-season strength and hypertrophy, and then get one of the conditioning programs in and that at the same time. The app will let you do them both at the same time. That'll be absolutely perfect. That's a very good program for running in a deficit. There's a lot of volume there, load of post-exercise oxygen consumption. You'll be burning calories long after you finish training. So that's definitely a good option.
Kaiser said, do you think it's worth improving ankle mobility for the casual lifters? Definitely. I think
100%.
Full range of motion in your joints relative to your full range of motion is definitely something that is a good idea, both for performance, muscle elasticity. If you're a casual lifter, you obviously want to be getting the most out of your training. So having full range of motion allows you to hit better positions, probably helps prevent injuries. Harder one to say, but you do see reduction in pain when people have limited range of motion, so in different areas. And I would definitely be pursuing it. You don't need to kill yourself, but having it and then maintaining it is a lot easier than not having it, or a lot more useful than not having it.
Runner Boy says, I got a deadlift PR of 405. Should I take the next 2 weeks easy? Not necessarily. I probably wouldn't be maxing anything else out for the next 2 weeks. I wouldn't be going maxing your back squat or front squat tomorrow or anything. The thing with really heavy deadlifts or very, very high intensity deadlifts is they take a lot out of your central nervous system. Now, if you're not used to deadlifting really heavy or the deadlift weights aren't crazy high, the capacity of the body to really actually tax the central nervous system that much isn't incredibly high. So I know in some of the max deadlifting studies, we'll see central nervous system fatigue being prolonged, or we'll see it for 11 days or more. That's more for very highly trained populations. Now, it's not to say you won't be fatigued or anything along that line. You'll definitely be fatigued from a max deadlift, but there's no real reason that for the next 2 weeks you should go easy. You definitely shouldn't be maxing anything out or anything like that, but you should definitely just keep training.
Where are we next?
Callum Bud Brophy says, hey lads, with my max cleans, once I receive the clean in the bottom and start standing it up, my lower back sometimes curls and rounds as I stand. What do I need to strengthen or solve this? So there's probably 2 things. The first thing is you just need stronger upper mid back. Front squats will help lock that. Back squats will probably come first. So bigger back squat, then a bigger front squat. That will improve all of that. Now, the second thing is a lot of the time we see that upper back rounding in the catch of the clean is mainly due to the barbell being too far out in front. So the barbell being too far out in front comes from 2 places. First thing is you placing the barbell too far out in front, and the second thing is you moving too far behind the bar. So as Gareth talked about earlier, the barbell can be too far forward off the ground, can be too far forward during the pull, can be too far forward because you smash it too much with your contact point, whether that be with the quads or whatever, and you bump the barbell out and away from you. That's something you definitely need to look at. Make sure the barbell is sweeping back into you. Make sure there's no massive slamming the bar forward with your quads. And then the second part to that is the jump backwards in the clean. Most of the time comes from people over pulling the bar. So they extend backwards, throw their shoulders and head back at the top. And then because of that, they move their entire body backwards. And then the barbell sits out in front of them a small bit. But the big thing here would be strengthening that and then making sure your technique is good.
Another thing as well is when you're pulling, if your back isn't in an extended position, when you're pulling, it's very unlikely you can get it into an arched or extended position in the bottom of the clean. You know, you're not really going to be able to go from a maybe flex position, mildly neutral position, through the pulling extension, and then organize yourself into a fully extended position. Because if you're not extended when you're pulling, you're probably not aware of it massively. So it might not be an innate property for you. So it might be something you need to focus on. So then that means you're probably not going to be able to get into the bottom position in a fully extended position or an arched lower back. So it does bear focusing on maintaining it throughout the length of the pull. That lower back needs to be organized prior to that pulling. Rahul said, "Hey lads, please tell me why I shouldn't be embarrassed about snatching 35 kilos at the start of a program." Rahul, everyone has to start somewhere, and a little bit of embarrassment is no bad thing for progression and training. A little bit of kick up the ass, as we might say, isn't the worst thing. So maybe, Rahul, you should be a little bit embarrassed, and you should be like, "Damn, I'm never going to be this weak again."
Also, it's the only way you're going to get better technique. So
Mhm.
if you go to any, I'm going to say CrossFit gym, but any strength and conditioning gym where members do snatches and clean and jerks regularly, doesn't have to be CrossFit by any means. You're going to see a lot of people snatching between 60 and 80 kilos with questionable technique, and they will do it in perpetuity forever, and they'll never get better. Their kilos might creep up. They might put 5 kilos on over the course of a couple of years, but they'll get to that point where they're snatching 77, whatever the actual weight doesn't matter. They'll get to that weight and they'll stick there forever, and their technique will never change. And their technique will never change because they'll never do the lighter weights, and they'll never do the work at the lighter weights to actually make those technical improvements. So that's the other thing. Bit of embarrassment is no bad thing, but have the understanding in your head that this is the only way you get out of it. The only way out is through.
Cole McGarath said, "Hi lads, at what point am I no longer a beginner weightlifter? I have this 100, 120 target, good target, but it's like Achilles and the turtle. When are you no longer a beginner weightlifter?" I would say, so there's an argument to be made that time is the deciding factor, or there's an argument to be made that numbers are, and then there's an argument to be made that a combination of those are.
Yeah.
Time. To be honest, it's kind of like Kelly Starrett was talking about this in the podcast, and we had him on months ago. Like, when you see a freak, you know, you might never seen a unicorn in real life, but you'll know one when you see one. And kind of like this, you'll know when someone's not a beginner, even though they might not have progressed hugely. And to be honest, it actually doesn't even matter.
It really doesn't matter.
It makes no difference.
I wouldn't be putting that. I wouldn't be putting that nomenclature around training, the amateur, intermediate, advanced, whatever. Because even you'll get somebody who'll have trained their entire life, and maybe they were international competitors, and they'll walk into a different gym in a different country, and people will look at them and be like, "Oh, you just started training, did you? Oh, I did that in my first year." Like, it doesn't matter. Owie32, I know the feeling. You guys keep up with arm wrestling at all? And if so, any thoughts on Devon versus Levan? I have.
Who's the guy with the mutton chops? Is that Devon? Or
The Canadian guy who's with Jujimufu?
Yeah, who's the guy with the big forearms?
Absolutely no. I think they all have massive forearms.
Whichever that guy is, the fella that did some stuff with Jujimufu he's quite entertaining.
He's the only one I know.
Well, only
he seems class.
Only because it keeps coming into my social media, but I have no interest in arm wrestling.
I heavily work against having that on my feed.
You can't escape it.
John Candler says, "What is a good program for a distance runner, and what equipment would I need at the home gym?" So this is going to sound some way presumptive, but this is what most of the runners who are on the app are running currently, who are on programs, generally speaking, are running. So they go for a one of two approaches. The first approach they'll do is they'll use something like the off-season strength and hypertrophy work, and they'll spread it out a bit more. So the off-season blocks are 4 weeks long, and they're 4 sessions per week, which is quite a bit of strength and hypertrophy training for somebody who's a long-distance runner. In that case, when they go down that road, for want of a better term, they tend to do 2 sessions per week, and that 4-week block will take them 8 weeks. And that works exceptionally well. That kind of 2-3 sessions a week in the gym for the long distance athletes has been working very, very well for most of that population. Now, the second route is the basic strength training, whether it be basic strength training male or basic strength training female, obviously depending what group you fall into. And that works very well as well. But that is definitely more for the person who is newer to the game. Maybe they haven't done quite a lot of strength training or power training. That's a very, very low barrier for entry. Obviously, it's just basic strength training. You do not need a lot of equipment for any of the programs, but particularly for the basic strength training programs, you need very little equipment. A barbell, a couple of plates, and some kettlebells at home, and you'll be able to do 99% of everything that's in that program. Now, for the off-season strength and hypertrophy pieces, the big kind of arrow we have in our quiver here is that when somebody is training at home, we'll offer them substitutions. The big advantage of using the app is that the coach will give you your substitutions. You'll say, I can't do conventional deadlifts because I don't have a barbell. It will give you the substitution and tell you how to work that in there. So either of those options will work very well. If there's a bit more nuance to your case, just send us an email, sikastrength@gmail.com, and we'll help you out there.
Anton Lopez said, should I be striving for a more pronounced stamp in the turnover for the snatch and clean and jerk? So aggressive foot movement is incredibly beneficial in the snatch and the clean and jerk. So I suppose when you hear the word stamp, we're thinking of maybe relation to that donkey kick. And to be honest, that donkey kick isn't as big of an issue. Far more often is people not moving their feet enough with enough purpose or enough speed. So the problem where this kind of came to light was 2 different areas. It is one, the non-professional weightlifter can make the assumption that because something feels better in the short intermediate term, it's better in the long run. So sometimes for some people, because they're not very good at moving their feet at heavier weights, the idea is that, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do at heavier weights, rather than thinking, no, I suck and I need to get better and I need to make sure and understand that at heavier weights, my technique is going to be the hardest to maintain, but I need to understand that what's objectively the best technique, and then that's what I need to maintain and strive to hit at heavier weights. So that's one of the areas. In the other area was this idea that Chinese weightlifters didn't move their feet. Then we had some other international weightlifters talking about sliding their feet, even though they didn't do that in their own lifting. And I'm not naming anyone or calling out anyone. And then we got this idea that sliding your feet is better. And then further from that, then you get this idea that whatever kind of camp you subscribe to, that's a better technique, but there is no technique. There's only good weightlifting technique, and there's objectively better weightlifting technique that all the best lifters obey to varying degrees. And if you can look for those right principles, you'll see a consistency among them. So the foot movement, we like faster, larger foot movement. It works better for a lot of people for very good reasons. You get into the barbell, into the bottom position faster, in a better position. You can be very consistent with it if you practice it. You get extra barbell height and speed on the barbell, a couple of extra %, but it does make a difference. And you get into this really strong position in the bottom. No foot snatches feel nice, but very often you can't lift as much. You're not as organized. You need that separation. You don't get as much speed. Very often people who don't move their feet end up getting under the barbell slower, and they also swing the barbell a little bit more. So stomp is the wrong word. Aggressive foot movement might be better, but you don't have to take it to, was it Nicola Ionica, the Romanian lifter? He had pretty aggressive foot movement, but it's not, it's important. It's not to be an all end all, but there's nothing wrong with moving your feet. And it's definitely something that does add a lot of quality lift when done in the right fashion.
Bill says, how should absolute weight affect percentage-based loads? Example, should 80% at 100 kilos be seen as the same at 80% at 220 kilos? So the percentages and your allocation of training volume around those percentages is quite similar. Now, I say quite with inverted commas around it because the absolute load makes a difference. Now, in the case of 100 to 220, that is a diabolical difference. How you would prescribe volume to somebody who's snatching 100 kilos versus how you'd prescribe volume to Lasha in the snatch is obviously very, very different. And the big thing you're looking at here is total load going through the system. For you to get to 100 kilos, you do 60, 80, 90, 95, 100 or something around those jumps. For Lasha to get to 220, those jumps are absolutely massive. Now, or sorry, those jumps, there's more jumps in between, and the total amount of work being done is far greater. Now, the other thing, and the really important thing here, is the total fatigue on the system is much higher just due to the actual weight that's being used. So it's not necessarily that things are crazy different. It's not necessarily that you should be doing far more attempts at 90% or above because you're lifting less than 100 kilos. And then maybe if you're lifting more than 100 kilos, you should do less attempts at 90% or above, or vice versa, or whatever it is. You prescribe volume in very, very different ways, but you have to be cognizant of the absolute load having an effect on that person and the absolute volume increasing because the amount of time it takes for them to build up and hit those heavier weights is bigger, or the amount of volume it takes is bigger.
Seth said, my snatch is 143 and my max clean and jerk is 155. Should I do strictly clean and jerks and front squats to catch up? Only clean and jerks? Seth, no would be the answer there. So you want to make sure you're still progressing your snatch because you obviously still want your snatch to progress. And the snatch probably isn't impacting your clean and jerk so much that it's holding your clean and jerk back. Probably what's an issue here is, if I had to guess, is that your squat numbers are pretty low. And if I had to guess even further, that your back squat number is pretty low. If I had to guess. Now, your clean and jerk technique could be really subpar, but it might not be, considering your snatch is 143. You can assume that you're a very skilled lifter if you can snatch 143. So usually you don't see that issue. So I'd have to guess that, without seeing your squat numbers, that it's your squat is the problem. The back squat is one of the issues. Now, bear in mind, an increase in your back squat won't immediately transfer to your clean and jerk. This is something that'll take quite a while to implement. It could take months, maybe even well into a year before you see that meaningful difference. So the immediate turnaround won't be that fast. So if it is a squat number, it could take a while. And then you have to balance increasing your squat with, of course, making sure that your snatch and clean and jerk stay appropriate and you're improving those as well.
Statacat says, what method have you found to be the most effective at developing hip mobility / deeper squats for stiff, immobile people? So there's three things I think that are incredibly important here. The first thing is that the person is still squatting. So making sure they're developing squat strength the whole time. A lot of the time we get very stiff or immobile people. It's not necessarily that they're over muscled or overburdened by this crazy amount of power they have in their legs or hips. A lot of the time they have some involuntary restriction of those joints due to the fact that they're just not able to accept loads. They're just weak in those positions. They're weak in the very bottom of the squat or whatever it is, and then the body restricts them being able to do it. So consistent squatting is incredibly important. Squatting twice a week, incredibly important. The second thing is that we artificially limit all loading of the squats to ensure that they only squat weights they are able to do at a full range of motion. So in many cases, you might have somebody doing 250 kilos with really bullshit depth and they're getting nowhere near parallel, but they might be able to do 200 kilos with really good depth. And then that 200 kilos becomes their temporary 1RM, and we run all of the training numbers off of that temporary 1RM. So in the very same way where they'd be running a squat cycle and they'd input their 1RM at the start, 200 kilos becomes a new one rather than the bullshit 250 kilos. Now, the last point here is that we do full movement screening, looking at hip internal and external rotation, full hip flexion, full hip extension. Then we look at knees. Do we have good knee tracking in the squat? Do we have good knee tracking in the single leg squat? Do we have good movement around the knee? So can we fully flex our knee, bring our knee all the way into our ass voluntarily without having to pull it in? Can I extend my knee fully and hold my knee in a fully extended position? Then we look at the ankles, look at the foot, make sure the feet aren't doing anything weird, make sure we don't have fallen arches or anything along those lines. If you stick to those three things, getting a deeper squat is probably one of the easiest things you're going to do in training. it is a very, very natural position for people to get good at. And also because of the squat, because you're under load as you're sitting down into those positions, it tends to be a quite simple road. Now, it doesn't mean that it's a fast road. It doesn't mean you're going to get there immediately, but the steps are simple. You don't have to do anything complicated. You don't have to do any weird balsa ball balance stuff to get there better. Most of the time, it's a very, very simple process. Keep them squatting, limit their squats to a weight that they're only able to do full depth squats with. And that might be 40 kilos for some people. And then the last thing, make sure you screen, look at where their restrictions are. And obviously going along with that screening, you prescribe mobility work to them.
Come on, tell messages.
Comrade Coolio says, hey lads, I'm about to wrap up off season 1 and enter off season 2. Do I enter the same 1RM for 2.0 even though I haven't come close to maxing out in the past 4 weeks?
Yeah.
Exact same. The only time we change our 1RM numbers going from block 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, whatever, is if we've gone up and maxed out. Or we have an immediate blockade in place where my bench press was 100 kilos and I wasn't able to bench 90 kilos last week when I was supposed to do it for 3 or something along those lines.
Rishav said, how do you fix shoulder internal rotation when someone's in the bottom position of the snatch, but when they're standing, they're easily able to maintain external rotation in their shoulders? So it could be a variety of different issues. It could be a mobility issue. It could be a stability issue. It could be a combination of those, or stability/strength, depending on what way you want to look at it. So it depends. It's probably a mobility issue. So just because you can externally rotate in one position doesn't mean that those related muscles are not restricted when you're in that position you want to be in. So usually you would start with, in the bottom position of a snatch, if you're limited in external rotation, start with the pecs, see restriction there, look at the shoulders, then the biceps. You could also look at forearms. So forearm pronation and supination is heavily related to that overhead position being externally rotated. So you've got to work your way all the way along the chain up to here. Then you have to look at lats and thoracic. Also, you need to look at hip and ankle mobility. So if you imagine your hips or ankles are really restricted, your hips sit really far back, you're not going to be able to sit far back, stay balanced, and externally rotate in the bottom position. You're going to have to internally rotate to counterbalance that weight. So if your hips are back, you're going to have to push your chest forward. But if you don't have that mobility, you could have a combination of this. You can't externally rotate, so you're going to have to try and be like this, or you're going to be like this in the bottom position with those hips back and the knees back behind the toes. So you actually, in the snatch, it's a whole body movement, so you do have to look at that mobility and look at literally everything and see what the issue is. Now, that'll be very quickly. That's not the hard part. Fixing is the hard part, but paying attention to it is, and being diligent and consistent with it is where you need to start. So look at what the issue is, and then I like to start with soft tissue work, mobility. What mobility do you do? The great thing about mobility is that there is so many different areas and ways of attacking things, band distracted stuff, mobility, weighted stretches, static stretching, soft tissue work, a combination of those. So looking at which one and then finding one that might help is a good way to start. Hey Salas said, let's say I was doing training for a long time and I took a month off. How should I approach my training again? So slowly, very, very slowly approach it, casually, see where you are. If you've been training for a long time, you'll have a good innate regulatory of how you're doing and how you're feeling. So you approach it like you would normal training, but maybe like you would after an injury, after sickness, just go super slowly.
Michael Everett says, thoughts on intense sprinting training to supplement weightlifting. I notice my lifts go up faster after a few sprint sessions. So there's definitely some crossover there. It's definitely beneficial to be a faster, more explosive athlete. See a lot of weightlifters doing plyos, particularly doing plyos and maybe even some sprinting in their off season. Now, that being said, weightlifting takes a lot. The sport of weightlifting on its own is a very, very demanding sport. Unfortunately, it's very demanding to a couple of very particular areas that tend not to fare too well when we do a lot of sprint training or a lot of plyos, particularly the knees, ankles, and back. If you're really hammering athletes with sprints and plyos, which is the reason most of the time that work is kept to the off season. Most of the time, any of those kind of bigger sprints or plyo, big, heavy plyo work will be kept in the off season for weightlifters. Undoubtedly, it's beneficial in the same way where it's beneficial to be bigger, faster, stronger for weightlifting. We don't tend to program it all that much. Definitely it gets programmed a lot for the track and field athletes, a lot for the field sports athletes. But for weightlifters, there's so much going on. There's so much technical work they need to do, and they spend so much time in the weight room. We tend not to program it. David Thulis says, setting up training split for coming back from an injury. Would running the horse program 3 times a week be a good plan to go alongside judo plus BJJ? I want to cut down to be lower weight as well. So definitely when you're coming back from an injury, there's always wariness there with total training volume. Usually because we're coming back, we tend to overthink it, and due to that, we overprescribe. So we'll say, I'm going to do BJJ twice a week. I'm going to hit the judo gym twice a week, and then I'm going to do 3 more sessions, and I'll definitely be able to recover from that. What I like to do is more of a stepped approach to people returning to play. And usually the first thing they bring back in is their S&C training. So S&C training tends to be much lower impact. Tends to, obviously, if you're doing BJJ and judo at the same time, you'll take out those concussive elements. You'll take out those larger impacts on the joints, but also just on the body, generally speaking. And as well, when you go back into those contact sports, if you're going back into contact sports with a meat vehicle that is not well conditioned, you are far more likely to get injured. So going back onto the tatami when you're not in the best shape and trying to do things you were able to do when you're in good shape is a very, very bad idea. So in my opinion, your best return to play protocol here is a couple of weeks, and it's a very short period of time in the long term over the course of your career, 2 or 3 weeks where you're just hitting the S&C work. The horse program 3 times a week, by the way, absolutely perfect. Obviously, you bring the next session forward then into the next week. So 3 times a week to the gym for 2 or 3 weeks just to get the body trucking again. Maybe you do some aerobic conditioning alongside that, so the BJJ sessions and the judo sessions don't take quite so much. And then I titrate in again. I wouldn't immediately go to BJJ and judo both being brought in at the same time. I'd say, okay, this week I'm going to just do 1 BJJ session, next week 2, and then maybe a couple of weeks after that, do the 2 BJJ sessions and the judo session as well. So I know everybody does it. We both have done it where we're returning from training and we really over plan and over prescribe, and we're going to do everything at the same time once we're back to being healthy. It's a guaranteed way of being out of sport for longer again. So slowly ramp back into training is my big piece of advice.
GM17 said, what's the 5x5 for Snatch? Is it 5x2 or 5x3? What's the kind of foolproof progression? So its progression through the volume in the appropriate stages is the foolproof progression. So, you go from your triples, your doubles, and your singles, your heavy single, and that remains the same in the individual sessions for most of your career. Sometimes you'll see athletes go higher volume than that, maybe 7, 8, 9, 10. Gabriel has talked about 15 sets of 2, but Gabriel is pretty unique in that fashion. But multiple doubles is usually kind of a good place to be for weightlifting. But there's a minimum level of complexity needed when programming, and the same goes for snatching. And there's a minimum level of complexity here we need to hit. So it's not that you want to make it super complicated, but it doesn't really translate quite the same. But even in the squat, there's a minimum level of complexity that we need to be hitting as we progress. So the question is kind of almost unanswerable, or I couldn't give you a fair answer for what you're asking.
Trenbolone SARMs, which...
No, it's a kind of an injury question specific.
Oh, yeah.
Just to remind people,
yeah,
we don't do injury-specific rehab questions.
Michael Evert says, realistically, how much training time do you need until you know if you have elite potential or not?
First session.
Straight
you'll
away.
Know. Immediately.
In certain sports, like, okay, first time you play golf, you're not going to know if you can be a pro golfer or not. If it's a...
No, you said sport.
Hey... so same in rugby or soccer or something. If it's a power sport or speed sport, you'll know immediately. Your coaches will know before you've even done anything, if you're high level or not. But most of the time, it's immediately apparent. Obviously, there's certain gameplay aspects and tactical aspects of certain sports, but you know a unicorn when you see one, and it's incredibly obvious every time we see one. There's no question mark. There's very, very rarely in like the very in track and field, in strength sports, power sports, there aren't really question marks. It's very, very rare where the black swan becomes the great athlete, where somebody might say, oh, we should take a risk on him. Maybe he'll work out or she'll work out. Most of the time, you know immediately. And weightlifting, powerlifting, track and field, it's glaringly, painfully obvious.
The saying is, when you're good at something, you'll tell everyone, and when you're great at something, they'll tell you. So you'll just be like, oh, you should keep doing the sport, or people will try to keep you in, or they try to keep you coming back. If it's a field sport and you're younger, they're going to be calling your home phone all the time, or your parents, and be like, is Dara coming playing? Is he training later? Like, you'll know. There's never even a question. No one's ever been really good at a sport that they gave up, that they didn't know they were going to be good at, I don't think. And certainly someone will tell you. Like, literally first sessions, like, you know, first time I was squatting in a gym, like I squat nearly double body weight, 120 first sets for like a triple. It's sometimes you do, sometimes, not often, kind of in stuff like maybe bodybuilding, maybe in strength sports, but not really in strength sports. You might start off like in bodybuilding super skinny, and then you just blow up in your training. That can happen. That's not to say it never happens, but most of the time in sports, like, it's plainly obvious, and it's definitely like the sports that I was talking about there. It's just something that's like, it's obvious. It's almost straight away.
What I will say is it happens in reverse more often, because the person usually doesn't have the mindset to go along with it.
Yeah.
So far more often you'll have somebody who's physically gifted enough to do it. You'll say that person could be great if they really wanted to, and then they'll fall apart and they won't follow through, or they won't be able to capitalize on it. And sometimes that's due to injuries and stuff as well, but most of the time it's up here and that they don't pull through.
Okay, will we
pick a few?
So
Mike Lever says, is this channel your main gig, full-time job?
Yes. We're a coaching company, actually.
Yeah.
We wouldn't consider ourselves YouTubers, but it is the main gig for YouTube. We coach athletes, weightlifters, powerlifters, rugby players,
everything.
Soccer players, fencers, swimmers,
shot throwers,
bobsleigh, kayakers, speed kayakers, climbers, judo, jiu-jitsu,
American football,
Irish Gaelic football, hurling, baseball.
Did you say jiu-jitsu?
I said jiu-jitsu.
MMA. A lot of athletes.
No rugby sevens, though, 'cause it's not a real sport.
Thousands of athletes.
So did we say soccer?
Soccer.
Trying
to think of anything else. Have we had a lacrosse? Oh, I had a lacrosse player.
Swimming, said that. Cycling, all the variations of cycling.
Yeah.
Lots of track and field athletes, obviously.
Yeah. A lot of big, strong guys and girls.
Boxing, kickboxing.
Speaking of freaks and unicorns who you know you're going to know the minute they walk in, Blaine McConnell is in the chat.
Hey, Blaine.
Story Pappy. Everyone say hi to him. Someone was asking, Cameron Gormley says, what belt in BJJ are you both? We're both the bluest of blue belts. And when did you both start? We started the November before last. So November 2024, we'll be 3 years in. So we're just going to pick a few questions here. Jinji G says, hi lads, do you think prehistoric people got overuse injuries? How did they deal with the injuries overall? Maybe SMTH? Maybe something we can learn from that. So in my thinkings about this, I think you'd see prehistoric people dealing with overuse injuries in the same way you'd see a dog dealing with an overuse injury or an injury a dog would have. In the case of your dog jams their foot in the door or gets a cut on the bottom of their pad, they'll limp on that foot. They'll probably lick it to try and clean it. They'll probably keep load off it as much as possible. And is there something we can learn from that? Probably not. I'd say we've probably gone beyond that, to be honest. I don't think There's a very funny line from a comedian, Darrow O'Brien, who said all the traditional medicines and kind of various medicines and stuff all got tested when the scientific method was ratified, and all the stuff that worked became medicine, and the stuff that didn't work stayed as traditional medicine. It's not that there's not benefits from some of those traditional methods, but most of the stuff that really works comes in a pill form.
How harmful is a sports season, as in the weightlifting Bundesliga in Germany, for long-term progression, since you'd have to adjust your training to stay in close to peak shape throughout the season? This, Adrian, you've unbeknownst but stepped on a huge question among some academics and coaches in regards to concurrent on block periodization. Yeah, it's funny if you appreciate the context, but the answer is it's bad for performance. That's the whole reason that periodization has come about, and that's the big argument. No, that's not the whole reason periodization came about. Periodization is the only way you can progress. But if we look at the subgroups of periodization, and this is the big argument that concurrent periodization makes. So in traditional periodization, you peak for a certain competition or maybe multiple competitions. You have a certain window where you're trying to be the best possible shape. Sometimes it's hard to get it right. And then we'll see a decay in performance after that if we get it wrong. The argument is that from concurrent periodization side of things is that you're seeing a decay over the course of the season, and you find it hard to peak for individual events. So concurrent periodizationists from the cult of concurrent periodization would say that it's better to train everything all the time, all year round, and then you're in better shape for those competitions. The argument against that, or against largely always spending time in concurrent periodized training blocks, is that you get higher peaks and better performances when you periodize and try and get better in the right places, so you just collect a little bit more. So is it bad for performance? Yeah, fair weightlifting it is. Well, in some regards, because it's really hard to compete consistently without seeing negatives in terms of fatigue, and no one outside Carlos Nazar seems to be able to do that many competitions that consistently. Now, obviously, there's,
the implications.
There is the implications for why he's able to do that so consistently. So, Anyway, thanks for all
Bobbinson.
Oh, you got one more.
Last one. As an advanced trainee, how do you notice hypertrophy after so many years? Is it just a mirror? So I want to answer this because this is really, really, really important. Obviously, when you start training, things become very, very apparent. You'll notice a difference in yourself in 3 weeks. After 3 months of training, everybody else will notice a difference, right? So those differences are incredibly easy to track. You don't even need to track them really, because you're just doing anything, and before you were doing nothing, so it's clearly making a difference. Hypertrophy is something that, with athletes in the off season, like rugby players are a classic example of this, and we get piles of rugby players looking to put on size in the off season. People say this is hard to track, but this is probably the easiest one to track. I'm looking around the room here because we have a few of them in here, a seamstress's measuring tape, like a cloth measuring tape that comes in a roll. Get one of those, and you will take maybe a 3-point or a 5-point or a 7-point measurement set, right? Mid-arm width, hip to stomach ratio, chest ratio, neck ratio, whatever it is. Measure those. After 4 weeks, you measure again. After 4 weeks, you measure again. 4 weeks, you measure again. Some people like to do a weekly one. To be honest, I don't like a weekly one because I think there's fluctuations in how much water an athlete will hold, depending on how much fatigue they have, depending on the amount of conditioning they're doing, depending on the amount of sodium versus hydration they have, whatever it is. There'll be vast fluctuations in how much water they hold, even things down to like the amount of girth in their midline. So I like 4 weeks, particularly if they have like a 12-week off season. They've measured at the start, measure week 4, week 8, week 12. You've got 4 nice measurement points there, and you can really track it. And this will track, obviously we don't have DEXAs. Like most people don't have a DEXA that they easily have access to unless you're at a national team or university setup and you know somebody running a DEXA machine. But the measuring system works incredibly well, can be incredibly consistent, particularly if you're training with a training partner and both of you become skilled with taking those measurements, like the finding those bony processes or palpating for the bony processes, measuring your midway points, making sure you're measuring at the same point each time. It's very, very trackable, very, very easy to keep an eye on.
Thanks for all the questions.
If you've questions that are urgent, programs, training plans, consultations, app, sikastrength@gmail.com is the best place to get us. If you want to see any of the training programs we talked about today, you can try a free trial on the app, free of charge. You don't have to do anything. You just set up the app. Sika Strength app, iOS, Android, everywhere you get your apps, it's there.